What I'm going to be doing right now is going through the 6 principles of the abolitionist approach. We have this in our new book, which is out in the expo. It has, we think what's between the covers is great, but whatever you think of what's between the covers, the art on the front, 2 originals from Suko on the front and the back. I happen to think that Suko is the best, most brilliant political artist of my generation, for sure. Anyway, all right, let's go through the 6 principles of the abolitionist approach. If some of you are welfarists, that's fine. Anna and I welcome the opportunity to argue with you. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. This is America. If you're a welfarist, you have the constitutional right to be wrong. All right, let's talk about the first principle. Principle 1, abolitionists maintain that all sentient beings, human or non-human, have one right, the basic right not to be treated as the property of others. Now, animals are property. Understand that. However much you love however much Bob Linden loves Daisy, the law views Daisy as Bob's property. If Bob wishes, Bob can take Daisy to a kill shelter. In most states, Bob can kill Daisy himself as long as he does so humanely. Daisy is Bob's property. If Bob wants, Bob can value Daisy at 0. That's what it means to own property. You have the right to value it. So Bob can value Daisy at 0 and kill her. Okay? So animals are property. They are chattel property. Now, we recognize that human slavery is wrong. However we feel about other forms of discrimination, or whether we feel certain forms of treatment constitute discrimination, we all believe that human chattel slavery is wrong. That is not to say it doesn't exist. It does exist. But nobody defends it. Why not? Because we recognize that if a human is a slave, then that human cannot be a person in the sense of having morally significant interests, but is a thing that exists completely outside the moral and legal community. Okay? Because why? Because slave owner, do you really need me to be that loud? I mean, is this okay? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, obviously, some people can't. I'm sorry. I just hate these things. I teach in a room not much smaller, and I don't use any microphone. But in any event, all right. So we recognized that, for example, race-based slavery in the United States, people came to the recognition that if humans were chattel slaves, they existed completely outside the moral and legal community. Slavery was wrong. All humans should be treated as persons, i.e., all humans, whatever their personal characteristics, whatever other interests of theirs we protected, they should all be regarded as persons, i.e., beings whose interests mattered morally and who had intrinsic or inherent value. And as long as humans were slaves, they could not have intrinsic or inherent value. They only had external or extrinsic value. Okay? And so we abolished slavery. Now, discrimination exists still. Okay? And we argue about whether certain forms of treatment constitute discrimination. But nobody defends chattel slavery, because we realize that if you are a slave, you have no moral standing. You are a thing. Same thing with animals. We all claim to take animal interests seriously, but animals are chattel property. As long as animals are chattel property, as long as Bob can take Daisy to the shelter and drop her off, and the shelter can kill her if they can't find another home, as long as Bob can take Daisy to a veterinarian and say, kill that dog, which Bob has the legal right to do, then Bob may love Daisy, but Bob, as the owner of Daisy, has the right to value her interests at 0 and kill her. Okay? So the first right, I've been a lawyer for a long time. When I first started off, I used to work for, I never did it for money. I did it as a volunteer. I worked with many of the large animal organizations. As a matter of fact, Anna and I spent a long time with People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA. And I used to do animal welfare stuff. I used to, you know, I was telling people last night at dinner, I remember the surreal experience of sitting there telling a judge that it was wrong to brand an animal, cow, on the cow's face, and that they ought to brand the cow on the cow's hindquarters. And I was thinking, what am I having this? I mean, I'm actually arguing that, you know, that we ought to brand the animal in one place rather than another place. And I used to do that sort of stuff. And then after a while, after I studied slave law, it dawned on me, as long as animals are property, animal welfare law will be worthless. And it occurred to me that just as in the 19th century, I mean, it really wasn't rocket science. I mean, it's surprising to me that it took this long for anybody to figure out such a simple idea. But it is a simple idea. Just as we recognized in the 19th century that as long as human beings were slaves, they'd never matter, that you could have all the laws in the world you want to protect them, and slave owners would always win in any conflict between slaves and slave owners always win, or else you ain't got slavery. And just as it didn't work in the 19th century, it couldn't work in the 20th or the 21st, and that basically, just as we recognized that the minimal requirement for personhood required that humans not be chattel property, we had to recognize that the minimal requirements for animals, if animals were going to matter, they too must have one pre-legal, moral, basic, fundamental right: they can't be property. Okay? So that's the first principle of the abolitionist approach. Animals have one right. It's not complicated. No one is saying they have a right to drive or a right to vote, although if they had a right to vote, we might have a better political system than the garbage that we have now. But you know, we're not talking about rights to vote or rights to drive cars we're talking about one right: the right to not be property. Okay? All right. Principle 2. As a result of that recognition of that right, we have to stop trying to regulate animal exploitation, and we must seek to abolish it. Okay? Abolitionists, and this is where it gets somewhat controversial. I say somewhat, you know, controversial in terms of we gauge the level of controversy of whatever we're doing at a given time by how many expressions, how many emails and PMs we get on Facebook wishing that we were dead from people who belong to Mercy for Animals or DXC or other groups that we believe are counterproductive. And PETA and HSUS and all the rest of it. Okay, we reject animal welfare campaigns. Now let's think about this for a second. If animals have a right not to be property, if it's wrong to exploit animals, if it is morally wrong to exploit animals, then promoting their humane exploitation is wrong. Okay? Again, this is not rocket science. If it's morally wrong to do something, then to promote continuing to do that, but doing it in a more humane manner, is also morally wrong. Okay? It also doesn't work because animals are property. Go back to principle 1. Animals are property. They only have economic value. Okay? And so it costs money to protect animal interests. You can protect all the interests you want. The more interests you protect, the more costly it is to exploit animals. So, given laws of supply and demand, what would you say if you took Economics 101? We're not talking anything complicated here. If you took Econ 101, what would you predict would be the level of animal welfare protection that would exist given that animals are chattel property? And the answer is simple. You will get that level of protection which most efficiently exploits the animal. We protect the interests of animals only to the extent that we get economic benefits from doing so. Let me give you a case in point. The 1958 Humane Slaughter Act. Okay, animals have all sorts of interests. Why is it that we protect their interests at the very moment of slaughter and say that large animals have to be stunned before they're shackled and hoisted and cut? Because if you've got a 2,000-pound animal hanging upside down by one leg. Their pelvises break. They're in pain. They move around a lot. They hit workers. The workers get injured, and carcasses get damaged. And that costs money. The 1958 Humane Slaughter Act increased the production efficiency of animal exploitation by requiring that animals be stunned so that they're not moving around, so they're not hitting workers, so they're not causing worker injuries, and they're not incurring carcass damages, which is exactly why chickens were not covered under the 1958 Slaughter Act, because people thought, well, you know, chickens are little. I mean, they're not going to injure workers. They're not going to incur carcass damage. And now, if you look at the campaigns that are being waged by PETA and HSUS for controlled atmosphere killing, this is the revolution. Gas the chickens. I mean, this is what animal welfare people think is a radical suggestion. Gas the chickens. But look at what PETA is saying. Look at what HSUS is saying. They're saying that even though you don't get the same sort of worker injuries and carcass damages when you're talking about chicken slaughter, there's still worker injuries because you've got electricity. You know, the animals are put through a water bath where they're stunned. There are knives whirling around. There's all sorts of commotion in a chicken slaughterhouse. Okay, and that basically workers are injured, and there's a tremendous amount of carcass damages because these animals are freaking out. The whole slaughtering process results in an enormous amount of carcass damage. So PETA and HSUS are arguing to industry, and industry knows this is the case. And as industry, if PETA and HSUS didn't exist, controlled atmosphere killing would come into existence because it's the efficient thing for industry to do. And so PETA and HSUS say, this is an economically efficient thing for you to do. Industry knows that, which is why industry is moving towards controlled atmosphere killing. And as they move closer and closer, and as more and more of them embrace controlled atmosphere killing, PETA declares victory. It would have happened anyway. They get your money. Industry becomes more economically efficient. It's a win-win for the animal people. It's a win-win for animal people. It's a win for industry. Only the animals lose. But this is... 21 years ago, I wrote a book called Animals, Property, and Law. What I did was, I surveyed animal welfare law and animal welfare measures that had existed in Britain and in the United States in the 19th and 20th century, and I came to the conclusion that for the most part, animal welfare measures did little more than make animal exploitation more economically efficient. That's what it does. Okay, can be niche markets where people say, I'm willing to pay a little bit more, so, you know, if you raise animals a particular way and make me feel good about exploiting them, I'll go to Whole Foods and I'll buy level 4 or level 3.5 or whatever it is. You know, I mean, there are niche markets where people are willing to pay more, but think about that for a second. Is that changing anything? And the answer is no. All that's doing is making people feel better about animal exploitation. We also abolitionists also reject single-issue campaigns, things like the anti-fur campaign or the anti-foie gras campaign, things like that. Why do we reject these things? Well, because, you know, both welfare campaigns and single-issue campaigns all require coalitions. They all require in order to make these things profitable campaigns for the PETAs and the HSUSs and the farm sanctuaries and the Mercies for Animals, all these organizations. The way you make these things efficient, the way you structure these campaigns, you focus on something, foie gras, and you say, okay, let's get a coalition of people who eat steak, who eat eggs, who consume dairy. You know, let's get a coalition, and some people who are vegan or veganish or vegetarian or whatever. Let's get a coalition, and we'll oppose foie gras because most of them don't eat foie gras, or all of them think that foie gras is a really horrible thing. Those people will contribute money to us. We'll fight foie gras, which a small number of people consume. Okay? And what message does that send? The message it sends is that eating foie gras is worse than eating steak and dairy and chicken and fish and everything else. So you build coalitions which promote animal exploitation by singling out the products which are lower welfare, and conversely promoting as better, morally better, the products of higher welfare. Same thing with fur. Look at the anti-fur campaign. What an embarrassment. I mean, that thing's been going. I've been doing this for 35 years now. Okay? When I first got involved in it, everything was the anti-fur campaign was the hot issue. It's still, the fur industry is more profitable now. More people are wearing fur now than they were wearing 35 years ago. Okay? But I mean, these things don't work. But again, look at the mechanisms of that. You get coalitions of people together who wear leather, who wear wool, who wear silk, and who think that people, mostly women, by the way, who wear fur are scum. And so we focus on them. Let's focus on the women wearing fur. That's worse than wearing wool. That's worse than wearing leather. It's not. There's no difference. There is no morally significant difference between leather and wool and silk and all the rest of it. It's all bad. And the idea, I mean, I remember, again, when I was a young lawyer, I used to represent people who were doing protests, fur protests. And I'd go to these fur protests, and there are all these animal people there wearing wool, wearing leather, calling women vile names who walked by with fur. You know, and I stopped doing it. I just wasn't going to get involved with that because I thought it was wrong. I still think it's wrong. I still think the anti-fur campaign has been vilely sexist, has promoted misogyny, and there is no difference between wool, leather, silk, fur, all the same. But you get an anti-fur campaign, and it builds a coalition of people who wear wool, who wear leather, who wear silk, who think that people who wear fur are worse than they are, they're okay. They're morally okay. That's how it works. That's psychologically how you have to build these coalitions. Okay? So so whether it's a welfare reform campaign or whether it's a single issue campaign, you're building coalitions of people who engage in animal exploitation, but who think that other people who engage in animal exploitation are bad people and they're morally better people. And I'm sorry, people, there is no way to interpret that as promoting the exploitation of, you promote wool, you promote leather, you promote silk when you condemn fur. You promote the eating of meat, of beef, of chicken, of fish when you go after foie gras. That's the way it works. Okay? That's how these coalitions function. Also, animal welfare reform and single issue campaigns end up forging partnerships between the animal community and institutionalized exploiters. I don't have the time. I wish I did. I wish I had, I sometimes do these workshops where I'll do these things for 4 or 5 hours. I could present hundreds of slides where you've got animal groups, PETA, Farm Sanctuary. I showed one yesterday where PETA was promoting Bell and Evans chicken. So you get you get partnerships between animal exploiters and institutionalized users. Okay? So the bottom line is that animal welfare single issue campaigns are immoral. Look, the bottom line is, if slavery's bad, you don't promote humane slavery, you promote the abolition of slavery. You know, and this is a key point. If it's wrong, you don't try to tell people there's a right way to do the wrong thing. If there's a wrong thing, you say it's the wrong thing. Nice and simple and clear. It's the wrong thing. You don't tell people there's a right way to do the wrong thing. Not only is it immoral, it's ineffective. Animal welfare is a complete, utter failure. We've had animal welfare for over 200 years. We're exploiting more animals now in more horrific ways than at any point in human history. The only people who are benefiting from animal welfare are the large animal organizations that are bringing in millions and millions and millions of dollars every year. It's a racket. There are more people employed in these animal groups, and some of them make extremely good salaries. You know, they're doing fine. They're doing just fine. The animals are not doing just fine. Okay, so what is it that we maintain? You know, something that we get all the time is, well, what's your practical solution? I got an easy answer for you, one word: veganism. That's the only thing you need to know. What we need to do, you need to be, if you're an animal person, you need to be vegan. Once you're vegan, then what you do is go out there and educate anybody and everybody you can. You know, because each of us has a sphere of influence. Each of us has friends. Each of us has families. Each of us, we have colleagues, people that we work with. Everybody, each of us can be an agent of change. And you know, as I said yesterday, if every one of us turned one person on to veganism in the next year, we could change the world in a decade. And you know what? If we keep doing what we're doing now, you know what we're going to be in a decade? We're all going to be a decade older, but there are going to be more animals being exploited in more horrific ways. And the only people who are going to be benefiting in 10 years are going to be the animal organizations who are pulling in the money by telling people there's a right way to do the wrong thing. The bottom line is, if you aren't vegan, you're an animal exploiter. It's binary. It's binary. If you are not vegan, you are participating directly in animal exploitation. It is that simple, that is irrefutable. And if there's anybody who disagrees in the question and answer period, I'd love to hear it, because you know what? I've never heard a coherent refutation of that. If you aren't vegan, you're directly participating in animal exploitation. You gotta stop. It's that simple. Okay? And then once you stop, it's also simple. You get out there and you talk to people. You know, yes, I have I'm a university professor, so I have, students that I teach, and I go out and I do things like this. But you know what I do and I love doing? I talk to people all the time. You know, when I'm at the grocery store and people say, wow, you got a lot of vegetables there. I say, yeah, I'm a vegan. And, I have all sorts of conversations. I have conversations when I'm getting gasoline at the gas station, and somebody sees that I've got dogs in the car. And, a large number of dogs, because I take them out for rides. And they're all rescued animals. Most of them are abuse cases. And I always say, yes, these are my adopted dogs. Have you got a dog? Go and adopt a dog, or go and adopt a cat, or adopt anybody you can, a rabbit or a ham, anybody that you can. And then I get into a discussion with them about, because they say, oh, aren't they adorable? I love dogs. Once somebody says that to me, I got them. What I say is, I say, well, isn't it interesting how we love some animals and we eat some animals? If I had a nickel for every time I said that, I'd be retired now. I mean, it's such an easy in. Hey, we really love our dogs. You know what? They're all vegan. They are. Yeah, they're all healthy vegans. That one came to us really, really sick, and now as a result of that dog's vegan diet, she's doing just great. As a matter of fact, there's a guy here this weekend. His name is Eric Weissman. He's over in the expo hall, and he has a company called Evolution Dog Food. Our dogs eat Evolution Dog Food, and they just love it. They inhale the stuff, and it's all vegan, great stuff. And so. But I always say, literally, I'm at a gas station, and I will have a conversation with people about veganism. And I have a little card out with howdoigovegan.com, which is a website that we created, that Anna and I and Sandra Cummings and a whole bunch of people who are here this weekend, we all worked on it together. We produced a website called howdoigovegan.com, and I give them a card, and and I always say, if you love your dog, there's no difference between the animal you love and the animal you're sticking forks into. So and you know what? People understand that. You don't have to get involved in a complicated discussion about what this philosopher said or what that philosopher said. It's easy. You love your dog, I eat chicken. There's no difference. There's no moral distinction between the chicken you eat and the dog you love. And people understand that. So you can do that too. There's another book that Anna and I wrote called Eat Like You Care, an examination of the moral. What's an examination of the morality of eating animals? Interestingly, this thing's now been translated into 13 languages. The whole point of the book is to sort of explain to people that if they are, we start off the book with saying everybody is upset about Michael Vick. Why are people upset about Michael Vick? Because he inflicted suffering and death on animals, and he had no better justification or excuse than the fact that he enjoyed watching dogs fight. And the answer is, if you're not a vegan, you're not morally different from Michael Vick. That's what this book develops that argument. Basically says there is no justification for eating, wearing, or using animals. And then it goes into all the but what about God, or what about nature, what about health, what about you getting enough protein, and all of these sorts of crazy things that people come up with, we refute in the book. But the bottom line is, you can all do that. Each of you gotta educate yourself first in order to become an educator. You don't have to get a PhD in philosophy, but what you do have to do is read some. You know, people say, I don't want to be bothered with that. I just want to be an activist. Well, you know what? You want to be an activist, you got to know what you're going to be doing. You got to know what actions you're going to do. And if you are not informed properly, you will engage in the wrong actions. So we have a movement of people who say, I want to be an activist. So what they do is they'll go to a PETA demo, you know, promoting, trying to get Burger King to agree to cage-free eggs or something like that. If they're thinking about it, you'd realize that promoting Burger King in any way is really sort of an ill-advised thing to do. And I mean, really, seriously, I mean, I hate it that I see all these animal organizations making deals with institutionalized exploiters. It makes me very sad when I see my old friends at PETA promoting people like Temple Grandin, who designed slaughterhouses, and giving her an award as a visionary for supposedly developing wonderful slaughterhouses. I got news for you people. There ain't no such thing as a wonderful slaughterhouse. You have to wait until I finish, okay? All right. Principle 4, the abolitionist approach links the moral status of non-humans with sentience alone, not with any other cognitive characteristic. You see a lot of these campaigns that focus on elephants or dolphins. I mean, look at the Tai Chi thing every year. Every year we got to listen to what evil people the Japanese are because they're killing the dolphins at Tai Chi. And we love dolphins because they're like us. They have they have human-like intelligence. Or we get upset about people who kill elephants because elephants grieve the way we do, and that sort of stuff. Well, you know what? An elephant may be bigger than a chicken, but as far as I'm concerned, they are morally equal. This idea that the animals that matter are the animals like the non-human great apes. They matter more because they're more like us. As far as I'm concerned, that's like saying, well, we like light-skinned people of color more than we like dark-skinned people of color because they're more like white people. I think that's obviously racist, but I think it's really problematic to say that the animals that matter more are the animals like us. I think that's really problematic. As far as I'm concerned, if an animal is sentient, by which I mean the animal is subjectively aware, the animal is perceptually aware. I mean, this idea that that Peter Singer and other people promote that animals that are sentient don't necessarily have an interest in continuing to live. To me, that is insane. The idea that's like saying a being with eyes does not have an interest in continuing to see. If a being is sentient, if a being is able to feel pain and experience pleasure, sentience is a means to the ends of continued survival. So if a being is sentient, that being by definition has an interest in continuing to live. It is the sentience of that being uses to continue to perpetuate his or her life. So this idea that, chickens are not forward thinking, so it doesn't matter if we kill them, which Singer basically says. And, he says it doesn't really matter. It's not a big deal if we kill chickens because they're not forward looking. They're not self-aware. And the answer is, that is just absurd. They may not be aware in the same way that we're aware because our thinking is linked with these concepts. And our thinking is, I'm sure, I don't know how chickens think, because I use language, you use language, our thinking is linked with concepts that come up with language. I don't know how chickens think, but they think. I don't know how dogs think. I live with 6 dogs. I have no idea how they think, but it sure as hell is the case that they think. And so this idea that, they're not the same as we are, they don't have an interest in continuing to live, seems to me to be nothing more than a speciesist prejudice that allows us to think that the main issue is treatment. As long as we treat them okay and slaughter them, as long as we give them a reasonably pleasant life and a relatively painless death, we've done well by them. And the answer is no. As long as we're using them at all, we have been unjust, and we shouldn't be doing that. Okay. Principle 5. Abolitionists reject all forms of human discrimination, including racism, sexism, heterosexism, ageism, ableism, classism, just as they reject speciesism. This idea, if you're an animal person, that is just about animals and you don't want to be bothered with human rights issues, sorry. If you reject speciesism, you reject it because it's bad, like racism, sexism, classism, whatever ism, because the reason why we reject speciesism is because we think it is unjust to exclude sentient beings from the moral community simply on the basis of species. If you believe that, if you share that view, then you are committed to rejecting all otherization. What's racism? Racism is excluding beings from the moral community on the basis of race, and race is an irrelevant criterion for that exclusion. What's sexism? It's excluding beings from the moral community based on sex or gender, and sex and gender are irrelevant, morally irrelevant to that exclusion. So our position has been, this goes back. When Anna and I were working with PETA, in 1989 or 1990, I remember we had a big meeting at PETA, and PETA announced the "I'd rather go naked than wear fur" campaign. And they said, this is great, this is gonna, and everybody thought this was great except myself. I said, I think this is ridiculous, and I think it's wrong. And I think as long as we continue to treat women like meat, we will treat animals like meat, and this has got to stop. The idea is not that you don't promote sexism in order to fight speciesism, And you know what? I'll bet you my life, no one's ever become a vegan. That should be tempting for some people in the animal movement. That there's never been anyone who became vegan because some young woman walked up to that person with lettuce leaves on her breasts and handed that person a veggie dog, okay? No one's ever become a vegan as a result of that, I can assure you of that, okay? That has nothing to do with turning people on to veganism. It has to do with promoting organizations, branding organizations, and getting publicity for organizations. That's what it's about. And PETA's sexism and misogyny has gotten worse and worse and worse to the point where they have had campaigns that I think are so vile. And it disappoints me so much that animal people don't stand up and say, no way, we aren't going to support that. Because what we've done is we've allowed PETA and some of these other groups to sort of hijack the idea. So I have a lot of progressive friends who don't want to be vegan. So what they do is, I don't believe in your movement. Your movement is sexist. Your movement is racist. It is. The organized corporate movement is sexist, it is racist, it is classist, it's got all sorts of problems. It ain't my movement, okay? Okay, it ain't my movement. And, now, look, I have to tell you, we're gonna talk more about this afternoon, we talk about intersectionality. It does trouble me that there have been some people appearing who say that I can't talk about abolition because I'm a white man, and the answer is, we've had slavery. Slavery didn't exist with just respect to people of color in the 18th and 19th century. We've had slavery for thousands of years. The concept of abolition doesn't belong to anybody. And the idea that I'm not supposed to talk, and the other thing I love all the time is when I say animal rights people shouldn't be sexist, I posted something, as a matter of fact, I post it quite frequently because I get a lot of reaction, and I like the reaction. And what I post is, if you're a feminist, and you're not a vegan, you need to think more seriously, because what you're doing is promoting the commodification of women, of female animals. You're promoting the commodification of those animals, and you're commodifying the relationship they have with their babies. I think when people say to me that they're vegetarians and they drink milk, I always say to them, look, I got news for you. It's all the same thing. Meat, dairy, all eggs, all the same thing. And that basically, if somebody put a gun to my head and said, eat the steak or drink the milk, I would like to say, well, you're gonna have to kill me, because I'm just not gonna have any. But let's assume I got scared and I was gonna make a choice. I would probably eat the steak before I would drink the milk. I think there's more suffering in a glass of milk than there is in a pound of steak. It's all wrong, it's all immoral, it's all unjust. But this idea that we promote, as animal people, we promote vegetarianism is, in my judgment, obscene. Dairy products represent unspeakable violence. Eggs, if you've never been in an egg battery, including the free-range egg batteries and the cage-free egg batteries that my friends at HSUS tout all the time, and Mercy for Animals, those places are hellholes, okay? And so the bottom line, the best of them are hellholes. And so, if you're, there's no distinction between these things. So basically, I put this up, I say, well, I put on my Facebook page, if you're a feminist and you're not a vegan, you need to rethink how you understand feminism. And I predictably get all these people saying, you're a man, you're a man, what can you say about feminism? And the answer is, I'm not an essentialist. I believe you have to look at what I'm saying, not who I'm saying. We don't look at who's saying it, we look at what's being said. And so I think these new intersectionalists, we're going to talk about intersectionalism later on this afternoon, but these folks who are saying that, white people can't condemn racism and men can't condemn sexism is nonsense. We all need to condemn injustice. Every one of us has to speak out against injustice. Okay. And by the way, what I find sort of interesting, and again, we'll get into this more, is that a lot of these new intersectionalists, people like Breeze Harper, for example, who wrote a book called Sister Vegan. If you read Sister Vegan, she talks about vegan fundamentalism, and there are many essays in that book that talk about consuming and exploiting animals. And there's this idea that if it's part of your culture to exploit animals, then there's something wrong. It's cultural hegemony to criticize the cultures of others if those cultures involve exploitation. You can't criticize it. And the answer is, I'm not a cultural relativist, and you shouldn't be either. If it's wrong, we should speak up again. We should speak out against it. It doesn't matter who's doing it, and nobody gets a moral pass. Principle 6, abolitionists recognize the core of the principle of nonviolence is the core of the movement. I believe we are the new peace movement. That's how I see this, okay? I see this as the new peace movement, and you know what? Here we are in Berkeley, right? University of California at Berkeley, big place, when Lyndon and I were much younger men, and there was something called the Vietnam War going on. This was like, one of the main centers of resistance against that. But I know Bob does, we see this as the new peace movement. And Anna and I have been doing this for a long time in terms of talking about this as the new peace movement. You know what? This idea that, that it's okay for us to, we ought to embrace nonviolence. I always tell people, if you're talking about nonviolence and you're shoveling animal products into your mouth 3 times a day or putting that stuff on your body, you're confused about what nonviolence means, okay? Similarly, I tell animal people who say, well, I'll tell you a quick story. I'm in Canada a few years ago, and this woman stands up, and I was talking at the University of Guelph, and she says, I'm involved with the Animal Liberation Front. And she says, if a vivisector is using 60 animals a year, 60 dogs a year in experiments, isn't it okay for us to use violence against the vivisector? And I said, let me ask you a question. Are you a vegan? Yeah, I'm a vegan. Is your mother a vegan? No, my mother's not a vegan. What does your mother eat? Well, she doesn't eat beef. I said, fine, she doesn't eat beef. What does she eat? She eats chicken. I said, she eats chicken a couple times a week? Yes. I said, fine. Your mother's responsible for more than 60 chicken deaths a year. Is it okay to kill your mother because your mother is an animal exploiter? And the bottom line is, people, in a society in which 95 or 97% of people consume animal products, the idea that it's all right to promote violence against animal exploiters is rather absurd if you think about it, because everybody's an animal exploiter, and there's no principled way to distinguish the animal exploiters who deserve violence from the animal exploiters who don't deserve violence. And yesterday I heard my friend David Nyberg, whom a very good friend of mine. As a matter of fact, Gary Steiner and I edited a series on animal ethics for Columbia University Press, and we published one of his books. But I think he's dead wrong. This idea that yes, institutional exploitation is a really bad idea, but the real problem is we're the ones who are demanding this. The system, you can change the system to some degree, but ultimately, if you don't change us, if we don't have that paradigm shift, the system's never gonna change. The system's never gonna change. So I think it's really important to understand the enemy, to the extent that you want to think of the world in terms of friends and enemies, the enemy really in many ways is not the institutional exploiter. The enemy is us. The enemy is our selfishness, our egoism, our materialism, and our inability to act on what we know is right and wrong, or our unwillingness, not our inability. We're all able to do it. And so that's it. That's what we discuss in much greater detail in the book, The Abolitionist Approach to Animal Rights. And that's the work that we've been doing now for couple of decades, it's the sort of the culmination is this idea of abolition. Animals have the right not to be property. Stop supporting animal welfare reform and single issue campaigns. It's not only immoral, it's ineffective, and it promotes animal exploitation. You want to know what to do? You want to say, hey man, what's your incremental theory of change? My incremental theory of change is turning the world vegan. Every single day doing vegan education, vegan outreach. That's how we're going to change the world, and we can do it. And getting away from this idea that some animals matter more than others, that non-human great apes deserve personhood. No, sorry, there's no difference. As long as they're sentient, they deserve the right not to be regarded as property. We need to be promoting veganism, embracing the idea that sentience is all that matters, rejecting all forms of discrimination, every single thing, all forms of discrimination, and rejecting violence and embracing nonviolence and recognizing we are the new peace movement, so let us not disappoint the animals who are depending on us. Anna, will you join me for a question? I want to tell you, we're about to celebrate our 40th anniversary. 40 years. She's a happy woman. She's a very happy woman. Okay, question.
That is impossible to tag team. We'd be here at 7 o'clock at night and 2 people were doing that. But,
yeah.
So go ahead.
Okay. All right, go ahead. Yeah, what'd you think?
I am so happy you guys are out there challenging us, pushing us, making us think, making current time schedule. I also think that you have the big picture for the best animals. I want animals to be entertained. I want to go to bed tonight and no more on.
Not gonna happen.
And so what I'm saying is I want you, I want it all to end. And if I was a chicken, I would rather be able to eat grass and then before I die, eat it, than live a miserable, horrible, torturous condition. I would rather be a pig who was able to turn around and nurse the piglets to maturity before the end of the world than to be the miserable, horrible, torturous. So I would like to kind of kick off discussion by saying that I feel like you are really big picture people, and I'm an individual animal person who I may not change the world, but I want to change that animal's life.
Let me ask you a quick question. If I were a slave,
What's the question?
the question is, she's saying that she agrees with the big picture, but there's that but. There's that but.
And.
Yeah.
It's an and.
All right. Okay. All right. She agrees. Well, I don't know how that could be an and, but it's more fun. But she's saying that she would rather be a chicken that has, that's a free-range chicken than not. She would rather be a pig that's not in a farrowing crate than a pig who is. So can we make these things consistent? And Anna will address that, but I just wanted to ask you one quick question. If I were a slave, I would rather be beaten 9 times a week rather than 10. So you're going to get out there and campaign for beating slaves 9 times a week? Is that what you want?
I would rather not be beaten as a slave.
So, but are you going to spend 1 minute of your time promoting beating slaves 9 times a week? Is that what you want to do? I mean, look, life is short. You and I are going to be dead one day. You want to spend your time promoting beating slaves 9
I'm not
times?
talking about that.
What, you're talking about chickens eating grass?
Making life so that animals aren't suffering until they die.
Do you
It's
believe
terrible.
that there is
Okay.
such a... Okay, go ahead.
Look,
I'd rather be an animal on a farm where I'm not, being beaten 9 times or at all.
Okay.
What I'm saying is I believe in making things lives better for animals and working on ending it. And I'm a vegan and I want animals to be
Okay, it's a very big question, but the animal who's suffering, the individual suffering that is keeping you literally awake at night, and it keeps us all awake at night, and I hope that's what's inspiring everybody to go on Monday and go and do more good vegan advocacy, is enmeshed, is in part of an oppressive economic system in which they, as an item of property, is a cog that we cannot extricate them from that. We cannot extricate them from that. And Gary, with the speed that he's very good at getting through this, has gone through the problems of single issue campaigns. He went through that as an issue, right? We can revisit that on an individual level in discussions later. In my 30 years of doing this, particularly in my experience as a lawyer, because you're talking about changing through regulations and prohibitions the system of animal food production, it does not work. If it worked, we would all have different gun control measures, for example. It's not a democratic system where our interests get reflected in the law. We get the minimal that we can agree on, and on some things like gun control, you can have measures where 90% of the population say, I want this, and we can't get anything done because it's in the hands of a very small number of non-representative people in this system. If our voices, our interests are not reflected, good luck trying to get the animals' interests reflected. The only thing I have come to the conclusion, and somebody prove me wrong, that until we get a core of animal people who by their numbers have power and authority to speak out, then we are going. My life is not long enough, yours isn't, all of ours strung together, everybody in Berkeley's life strung together is not long enough to dismantle these things. Vegans don't go to zoos. Vegans don't want any animal to be in the food production hell that they're in, so it's not, we're not focusing on whether there should be live export of animals. They shouldn't be in that process at all. And until we get organized with a critical number so that people take us seriously, so that we're not strange, so that there's vegans working in a vibrant fashion in every area of society, nothing will change. This has been going on for 200 years at least, and that, as Gary said, there are more animals being used in more horrific ways than ever. A very sobering thing that I think is on Gary's Abolitionist Approach page is that ticker of how many animals have been killed in food production while you've been looking at that screen. It takes your breath away. And it will never stop until we get vegans. Tinkering with the edges tells us we're doing the right thing, or else you wouldn't talk to somebody and they say, I don't eat foie gras, so it's okay that I eat steak.
This idea that you're having, that you'd rather be the chicken, I don't know what chicken you're talking about that has this great life, because, you know, we hear, I get an email every week from Paul Shapiro at HSUS, not a personal one, but rather a blast email he sends out, and he sent one out on Friday that I saw, and it just like took my breath away, which is like, you know, given I've known Paul for many years, and he says many things that takes my breath away, but it just stunned me when he said, things are getting better for chickens because, you know, they're going to these cage-free systems. I got news for you, sister. You ever seen the cage-free system? It is torture. So this idea that this is making things better, you know what it's doing? It's making people feel better about continuing this idea that you'd rather be a pig who can turn around. Let me explain something to you. Farrowing crates are an inefficient way of dealing with gestating sows. Electronic sow feeding and other alternatives are much better in terms of the profitability of the pork industry. The pork industry is moving away from gestation crates, has been moving away from gestation crates. These things don't happen overnight because they have tax, they keep the equipment until they can expense it out. But as large pork producers are retiring because they've now gotten all the tax benefits out of
what they're doing with the farrowing craze. They're moving towards alternatives like electronic sow feeding and things like that because there are fewer piglet deaths, there are lower veterinary costs. It's like the veal industry. You know, the veal industry, when you have a little mammal who has a nervous system just like yours, tethered by his neck in a crate, they get stressed, they have veterinary costs. If you take them out and put them in a small social unit, the veterinary costs go down. This has nothing to do with helping animals. This has to do with profitability. This is all happening anyway. The only thing that's happening is groups like PETA and HSUS are claiming victory and going to you and getting your, not you, but going to people and getting your donations. But this idea that what you want, you know, that if what you want is the end of it, then you ask for the end of it. If you don't ask for the end of it, if what you say is, I want the end of it, but in the meantime, I want chickens to be able to peck at grass and I want pigs to be able to turn around, what you're doing is telling people that if they're buying that stuff, they're doing morally right by animals. Because you know what? Every single one of those campaigns sends out the same message, which is that you're a morally better person if you buy cage-free eggs. And I got news for you, that's a fantasy, okay? That's a complete fantasy.
I'm saying good luck getting everyone to go vegan.
You know what? I'm not going to get everybody to go vegan, but you know what I will do? I will get lots of people to go vegan, and they'll get lots of people to go vegan, and they'll get lots of people to go vegan, and they'll get That's how it works. And the one thing I can tell you is if what you're doing is going out there saying, I want the chickens to be able to peck, and if you go to Whole Foods, you go buy happy pecking chicken eggs or whatever, what you're going to do, people are going to say, hey, good, I can keep on eating eggs. I can do the wrong thing, the right, they don't even think of it the wrong thing. I can do.
How many people have become aware of animal cruelty to animals through all the wonderful animal welfare organizations?
No, I absolutely, no. I believe that the animal welfare groups have done nothing but retard progress. All they've done is to perpetuate. I'm sorry, but if you're going to tell me that PETA and Peter Singer and Mercy for Animals and Farm Sanctuary promoting Whole Foods has created a higher level of awareness, you and I are living on different planets. Sorry.
What would you say to somebody who has gone vegan, completely buys vegan in their food and things like this, but is having a slower time transitioning their wardrobe, their furniture, their car, things like that?
Well, the trouble is because we've got an animal food industry that provides all the byproducts that then get converted into your car seat and the glue that sticks together your fabric seats and the glue that sticks together books and it's probably in this computer and everything else. It's almost impossible to get away from it. I mean, I would encourage everybody, of course, even if they've got clothing or something, to the extent that it's economically feasible for them to replace it. It's good for their advocacy not to be wearing something when they're talking to someone. It's good for their soul not to have it on them. So it's a way of doing it. Not everybody's able to do it immediately, but once you've changed your diet, I think it usually becomes something that you want to do as soon as it's practical, as soon as it's economically feasible.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, I always talk about eating animals. You know, people say, well, you know, veganism was, yes, I know veganism was beyond eating animals. But the thing is that nothing changes until you stop eating them. And once you stop eating them for moral reasons, everything changes. So, you know, once you say, hey, I can't eat animals anymore because it's immoral, then when you go to buy your next pair of shoes, you go buy leather. You know, if somebody says to me, I can't afford to get rid of the shoes that I have now, you know, I'm not going to say, well, you know, you got to walk barefoot. I mean, you know, that would simply be a crazy thing to do. I mean, you know, and I don't think there's you know, if I could, you know, if you go vegan and you say, wow, I don't want to wear leather anymore, and you can afford to get rid of them, you get rid of them, and that's it. But if you can't, well, then you can't. But the next pair of shoes you buy, you make sure that, you know, and the same thing, you know, like a lot of vegans, you know, well, a lot of animal people don't seem to see the problem with wool. There is no difference morally between wool and, I mean, wool involves horrible violence, and all those sheep, you know, all those animals are eventually killed. And if you've ever seen sheep shearing, I mean, it's dreadful. And you know, and the whole process of wool is really horrible. So, just like, so that doesn't mean you have to get rid of every pair of pants you have once you go vegan, but like, the next pair of pants you buy, buy cotton or buy, whatever, stuff. And as Anna said, you can't get away from all animal exploitation. There's, as I said yesterday, there's like stuff on the chairs you're sitting on right now. If you buy a car that's got fabric, it doesn't have leather, still got glue in it, and the stuff, but that's because like we're killing like 60 billion land animals a year, right? And land animals, 60 billion, what a number, right? And 60
The
billion.
producers have to extricate every cent
Right.
they can from the death
So-
of that
so-
animal. So the bones get used, the fur or the hair gets used, the hooves get boiled down, teeth get used. It's amazing. But that stops when the initial demand for the food. We'll find something else. We're very creative people. We'll have paint without egg stuff in it. We'll have lacquers without animal products in it. Yeah.
I'm a bit ashamed to admit this, but I became a vegan only a month and a half ago.
Well, that's a
Well,
cause
that's
for
good.
celebration.
Okay, what's the bad part? You're a Republican?
I also thought that it was wrong to eat beings who suffered, and I thought, chicken suffered, so I haven't been eating chicken for years. But I had this crazy idea that if, they roam pastures freely for their entire lives and then kill them really fast, then it's okay. So when they invited me for barbecue, I would eat Argentinian cows. And last March this year, when I came to the US, I went to Whole Foods to eat chicken because it was step 2. I mean, it was supposed to be good. And I thought that was okay until I just happened to go on the internet and research why veganism. And just one day I realized this isn't the best.
Well, I think that's a perfect example. You obviously had an awakened moral impulse to do the right thing concerning the animals that were involved in your choice of what to eat. But the animal welfare campaigns, the animal welfare groups were telling you, if you choose this product, if you respect this way of production, that satisfied what that moral impulse required. And now you've seen that there's only one way to satisfy our moral obligations towards non-human animals, which is to get them out of this production method that exploits them as items of property. So you're there. But so many people are almost there. I was not lucky enough to be born into a vegan family. I was a happy meat eater for many years. Gary will tell you I'm not a big vegetable fan. So, I'm not a natural happy salad eater. But, so I told myself all sorts of no bigger animal lover. Nonsense, but how did I ever think of that? But that's why when you do your vegan advocacy, remember that comment, because you're almost ready, weren't you? When you just needed a shove of the right information. We've got the right information now.
This is a perfect example of why I disagree with this welfareism nonsense. Because he thinks, well, isn't it better that I'm going to Whole Foods and I'm buying level 2 torture, or level 3 torture, whatever? Isn't that better? And the answer is, well, isn't it better to teach your slaves 9 times a week rather than 10 times a week? And the answer is maybe better, but that doesn't answer the fundamental question of what is just. And that's what you gotta ask yourself. And that's how we have to educate. Look, we're not gonna turn the world vegan overnight. I mean, we can give this message to people. Some people will go vegan immediately. We have it all the time. People read that book. We get tons of mail from people.
The amount of
who have
emails
read-
that come from
who
that
have
book is
read
amazing.
Eat Like a Carrot and said, I read this book, somebody gave it to me, it pissed me off the first 3 chapters. By the time I got to the end, I decided I had to go read it. And we did that all the time. But the thing is, that, somebody comes up to you and says, I hear what you're saying, and I'm really concerned, but I'm not ready to go vegan. Never tell them, okay, eat cage-free eggs or eat crate-free pork. You tell them, okay, if you understand what I'm saying and you think it's morally wrong, It's your moral decision. You've got to make a moral decision. I can't make it for you. But you should never encourage them to engage in happy exploitation. Because once you do that, that's what they'll do. Once you tell them as an animal person, once you say, yeah, go eat cage-free eggs, you're a good person, pat the person on the head, that's what the person's going to continue to do. So, they may not, let them make the decision about what exploitation they want to engage in. Never give them a license, never give them a stamp of approval, never give them a ticket that says it's okay to exploit. In the same way, if somebody says, I'm not ready, I understand it's a quality business, but I'm still a racist. I still believe in racism. We don't say, okay, well then practice racist joke-free Monday. Don't racist jokes on Monday. Or don't abuse people of color, in a particular way. You say, look, you want to be if you think racism is morally consistent with your, with how you want to live, I can't stop you. But the bottom line is, you gotta always be clear, racism is wrong. And the answer is not to tell racist jokes, fewer racist jokes, or to be less abusive to people of color. It's to stop it altogether. You always ought to be clear. If people want to choose something else, it ought to be what they choose and not what you say is okay. Lydia. Can you try to speak up a little bit?
Just wanted to make a comment what that lady said, the last do you know how many people found out about the suffering of the animals because of those wonderful welfare organizations? I want to say that lots of people found out about the suffering. Lots of people were shown those horrible pictures, and lots of people were disturbed. But at the same time, those same people were told just vote for proposition number 2, and that will all be solved. And after that, people basically think that the problem has been eliminated, that animals are all treated well now, and that we all can happily consume animal products. It just worked as immunization of consumers. You give them the horrible information, and then you tell them that now it's solved. People happily buy all those beef and dairy and meat and chicken and whole foods. And they look at those pictures of farmers hugging their cows. No one wants to think what actually happens to those cows and their babies. That's what those welfare campaigns did. They did a lot of damage to those animals. And animals basically didn't get any help. They just got more.
Yeah, I think. I think that well, I obviously agree with that, but I think that, we never use, people always ask us, do we use, when we do advocacy, when we talk students, do we show gory pictures? And the answer is never. Because I don't show birth things to anybody. Sometimes in the class I might show it, but I always make clear to them, the problem is not how we're doing it, the problem is that we're doing it. Frankly, if you made it wonderful, if you raised the animals in a wonderful way, and and you slaughtered them, and you had them listen to George Bush speeches until they died of boredom or something. You killed them in a relatively painless way, and you gave them a wonderful life. It's still wrong. And so we don't show people gory pictures because I never want them to think that the problem is we got to make the treatment better. I focus them on one thing. If animals matter morally, we can't use them. It doesn't matter how nicely we treat them, we cannot use them. That is what is unjust. It is the use. And this idea that we're going to make the treatment better, first of all, it's a fantasy. You're never going to make the treatment better because of the property status of animals. But the problem is not treatment. The problem is use. Yes. Thank you very much, and we'll see you later.